And welcome to another Beehive Growth virtual event. We are here with Christina Volchek joining us today. She is a freelance designer. I'm going to let her give a little quick intro and then we can get started. Hey, Christina, thanks for joining us today. Would you like to give a quick overview of your background?
Yeah, sure. It's nice to meet everyone. My background is actually in digital marketing, so I turned into design just like 5 years ago. And since then, I was working as a product designer, helping various startups, businesses, and recently I decided to focus on helping solopreneurs and entrepreneurs and content creators. So my big focus was launching my own Beehive newsletter, Designers Coffee newsletter. Sign up if you want. And now I'm helping others with their newsletter designs.
Amazing, and thank you so much for that. This is really cool. This is a first for these growth webinars because Christina is a member of the Beehive community. She reached out through the Hive, saw that we were doing this webinar, and it worked out that we were able to have her join as a guest. So usually we've had different guests obviously for each event. Usually they've been pulled from existing partners, but this is our first time meeting today, and super happy to have her along. And for those that are out there, if you guys see webinars that are or virtual events that are coming up that you have some subject matter expertise on, don't hesitate to reach out. I can't promise that we'll be able to have everyone on as a guest, but this is something that I think we want to do more of, and engaging with the community and leveraging the expertise of our wonderful users and community. Um, Jumping, and I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get started. Let's see, window, screen two, screen one. There we go. Awesome. Cool. So thanks for joining everyone. We have a great presentation here. Oh no, I forgot to update the special guest. That's embarrassing. I'm sorry. We will fix that before we send out the deck. But this is not Francis. This is Christina. So sorry. Um, I knew there was one thing I forgot. I was focused on the content yesterday, and one of those small things that I forgot to update. But we're so happy to have you join today, talking about newsletter design and how to elevate your newsletter design for growth and engagement. We have a pretty packed agenda here today, so you can see what we're going to be covering on the left, and then. As always, if you have any questions, you're coming to this event with, please drop them in that link. It's beehive.link/Q&A. You can also click on the link. I believe it's in the chat now. Um, we will cover those questions at the end in our Q&A. But with that said, if you have any questions that that pop up throughout the presentation, please add them to that link. We try to save all the questions for the end so that we can keep the presentation moving along, so we can get through all of the great content that we have. I say this every time, and there's always people who join a little bit late, but all resources, the recording and the deck will be shared. We are a little bit backed up on some of our past webinars. We've been doing a ton of them, but we try to get these out in a couple days. You'll receive an email in about 2 hours that has the link to where our past webinars live, and that's where this one will live as well. Just give us a few days to get that published. But everything will be provided. I'm going to get some crowd engagement here. So invariably, there's always at least one, usually more than one, people who join a little bit late, and their question is, will the recording and everything be shared or made available? And so, as a group together, this actually works a lot of times. I've been very proud of the audience. When they invariably jump in, if you could respond in the chat, yes, everything will be recorded. That'd be incredibly helpful so that we don't have to jump in and disrupt the conversation or anything like that. So, with that being said, we are ready to go. So, the way that this normally works, if you are new to our virtual events, I'm going to cover the content on the slide, and then we'll toss it to Christina for her expert opinion and advice. That usually spurs some good conversation and maybe generates some questions from you. So, if you do have those questions, again, use that link, drop them there. Anything that we don't get to, we will release within the recording as kind of a Q&A, as well as It's super helpful for us to understand what users are wondering about because it helps us create content in the form of blog posts, videos, all kinds of resources, knowledge-based resources if it's beehiiv specific, and so forth. Uh, the last thing I'll say before we jump in is that these presentations are done kind of from a beehiiv perspective. We're a newsletter company. We obviously have our own perspective, but if you're not yet on beehiiv, these this advice and this content is also for you. We try to keep it for the most part pretty beehiiv agnostic. Most of the principles or all of the principles we'll cover should be applicable to newsletters of any kind. You don't have to be on beehiiv for these to work for you, but I think there's a lot of ways in which they'll work, either easier or better if you are on beehiiv. So if you're on the fence or you're curious, definitely encourage you to check out beehiiv. We have a great 30-day free trial where you can access all of these great design functionalities and features. So jumping into things, we're going to start the conversation with the psychology of newsletter design. This could probably just be called the psychology of design, but of course we're talking about newsletters. So there's four principles that I have here that will guide kind of the conversation as we go through the rest of the presentation. So those are visual hierarchy, color psychology, pattern recognition, and cognitive load. At the end of the day, most design that you see is optimized around these four basically topics or characteristics, and they help your readers, they help your subscribers understand and comprehend what they are reading. It's amazing and sometimes overlooked how simple elements of design can really change the way that something is presented or absorbed. If you'll call back, if you joined us for our conversation on writing like a pro that we had with Francis, we talk a lot about breaking up the text that you're writing. If you can imagine, a big wall of text versus text that is nice and spaced out, maybe has some variety, becomes much more digestible, and that in itself is an element of design, but is I think a very accessible one for all of us. It's much easier to visually and gain comprehension through reading when you have a big wall of text broken out appropriately into sections, and a lot of those principles apply more broadly to the greater world of design, specifically visual design, which this presentation will focus on. So visual hierarchy is guiding the reader's attention. So where do you want them to go next? What is the first thing you want them to see? A lot of times, kind of the very simple one is like, big text is going to be read first, followed by text that's slightly smaller, and then the smallest text. And that's in itself visual hierarchy. Bigger means this is where my eye is drawn to first. If you see a big headline, you never read the body text first. You're going to read the headline, gain the understanding of what the content's about before you move on to the smaller text. And that can be applied in a bunch of different ways in which we'll get into. Color psychology, evoking emotion and action through color. One of the things that I follow a lot is this principle of, when you are working in a newsletter or a website and you want somebody to click an element, you should be almost like training your user to understand what is clickable by using the same color every time there's something that's clickable. If you had, a system where everything that you can click is kind of a different color, it becomes very hard for the reader to understand, okay, this is what I should click. This is something that's interactive. Versus if you use the same color for all of your buttons and all of your links, it becomes very easy for the user to understand, okay, when I see that color, that means that this is clickable. That means that there's an interaction that can occur. But aside from functional things, there's things like emotion. Something that, the color red is a much more vibrant, kind of aggressive color than something that's a little bit more muted. So if you're running a very kind of like clinical industry report, you don't necessarily typically see a lot of these bright, bold colors. You usually see a more muted color palette that is going to put more focus on the writing and present maybe a little bit more professional, more muted kind of emotion to the writing. Pattern recognition is about creating familiar and repeatable patterns for users to follow. You see this a lot with newsletters where you pick a layout where maybe you start with a main story, you have a secondary story, you have an ad, you have your links, and then you have your closing or whatever. It doesn't really matter that specific pattern, but you repeat that layout edition after edition after edition, and your users get to know what to expect. So when they open the newsletter and they start reading, there's never a question of like, what comes next? What am I expecting to read about next? And that actually leads directly into the last point. All of these things are kind of in service of this idea of cognitive load, where you're capturing your user's attention, and that takes effort. And so the harder you make it for readers to understand what they are being exposed to, then the more kind of mental energy it's going to take to process. And people have a finite amount of mental energy. If you can imagine, like back to school days where you're having to read a textbook, it's very information dense. There's a lot of cognitive load that is required, and usually a lot of textbooks, are full of just text. So it's just like a lot of writing, a lot of ideas that you're having to process, and that's why textbooks, traditionally are very like hard to read over long periods of time. It's just not fun to sit there and read a textbook because there is a ton of cognitive load going on. There is a similar kind of phenomenon with writing, and we go back to that example of just a big wall of text. A lot of cognitive load. If you can break that up, you reduce the cognitive load that a user has to do. And what that is functionally is a user is trying to understand. They're trying to place and understand what is in front of them. And so when you use visual hierarchy with things like headlines and subtitles or bullet points, it helps the user formulate in their head what exactly, where should I start? What is this? What am I looking at? Can I scan this? Is this interesting to me? If you just put a big wall of text in front of them, the load is very high because they're like, okay, cool, I have to now process all of this to really understand what's going on. So between color psychology, pattern recognition, visual hierarchy, all of these things play into reducing the cognitive load on the user, and kind of trying to strike that balance of, as I say here, information density and readability. Before we go on, this is so critical to kind of everything around design. Christina, I'd love to get your opinion on these different elements.
I would say there is one missing is motion that
Mm,
is introduced a lot recently, especially you can notice a lot of Beehive newsletters are using GIFs.
mm-hmm.
And from one side, it's a good thing to have. From another side, motion is something that attracts our attention immediately. So if you have a moving object in your newsletters, that's where like all the concentration will go toward to. So if you're overusing it, it becomes impossible to concentrate on the actual content. So think of GIFs as like a cherry on top of your cake. You want to put this cherry on just very top of your cake whenever you want to drag people attention or just add some humor or something like element of fun to your newsletter, but not overusing them. Um, so basically, I would say the easiest advice I can give in terms of when you're designing your newsletter, think of the main action, what you're expecting from your readers in this particular area of your newsletter. So when it's divided in section, it's a bit easier than you can think in terms of what I want from this section. Or when you're using dividers, again, so basically some separations, and just focus on this particular section, what you want here. If it's your intro, what is my goal here? I want people to get hooked into my intro. I want to tell them what will be inside of the rest newsletter so they're hooked and they want to read. If it's your middle section and you want to lead them to a particular CTA to click it, make CTA really pumping, uh, popping up in a way in the middle of your newsletter. Big, juicy, short, bold, very clear. Um, I wrote a comment in the chat because I noticed that some newsletters are using very long CTAs. In general, it's a bad practice because CTA is like a very bold action. So the simpler it is, the easier to consume, the faster people will go and click because they know what to do with this button.
Amazing, and I think that's a great suggestion to adding that item of motion here, and just to tie it back to the overall kind of like theme of the slide of psychology. It's as people, many animals. It's not just us. Are adapted to recognize motion. It's like if you imagine us on the safari, on the savannah or in a jungle. It's like if you're hunting or whatever, or being hunted, you're looking for every little bit of motion because that little bit of motion can be the difference between life and death. Obviously, in today's world, that's not the same case, but it's why motion can be very, very valuable when you are doing it very sparingly because it's going to grab attention immediately. And to Christina's point, if you use it too much, it adds to that idea of cognitive overload where if there's things happening everywhere, it's very hard to understand like where you have a lot coming at you. It's very hard to understand where to place the attention. But if you're using it very sparingly, like in those content breaks, a lot of times people have little animated content breaks. It's a kind of a signal that okay, cool, it's okay to take a break. It's going to grab the attention to that break, and kind of add some separation. also with like thumbnails, logos, all of the different things that are available, and just images too. They can also motion graphics. Obviously, a picture is worth 1,000 words. A video is probably worth maybe 1,000 pictures. I don't know if it's that many, but cool. Moving on.
You, sorry
Oh,
for
sorry.
interrupting. You just reminded me of very important element when we are speaking about motion or adding too many elements. We have to keep in mind the Gmail clipping. So
Mm,
once your beautiful newsletter get clipped, doesn't matter how well it's designed, people will go into unclipping mode, which is like really ugly, and all your beautiful sections or anything you did was beehiiv will be just ruined by clipping. So keep in mind this warning message in the top corner that your email won't be clipped by Gmail.
amazing. That's great advice. And yes, in the Beehive editor, top left corner, we have a little warning if it gets too long. Gmail, I think it's around 100 kilobytes. It's a little bit more, but we usually say like around 100, you'll be pretty safe. I think it's like 112, 110, something like that, maybe 120. Um, but yeah, uh, excellent advice because when you start adding a lot of these elements, they do add weight to that email. Moving on, so the one of the more basic places to start, I guess we could start probably with color, but we'll get into color in a minute. Kind of one of the most basic aspects when we're talking about writing is then typography selection. So there's a lot that you can convey when you're building your newsletter through the typography that you use. Now there's a lot of we're not going to get into all of the science and all of the details behind here. All of the science and psychology of typography specifically. There's a lot of resources online. But this is one of the things that a lot of people have the most questions about. Okay, I've started my newsletter. How do I choose the fonts that I want to use to basically convey this knowledge that I'm passing on to my users? So there's a couple different kind of elements to how you can shape and form the actual written design of your newsletter. This is not kind of the more visual colors or anything, but like literally how your content is presented. And so it's through font pairing. We talk about font sizes and weight. So bigger fonts, bigger weight. For headlines is going to draw attention versus smaller body text. Line spacing and kind of the width and kind of the size of the content, in the email. And then typography as a design element. So like, is there ways that you can, sparingly use maybe designed images that you can have like a non-typed like headline or something like that. I know some newsletters instead of actually using like the text typed into the editor, they will have an asset design that acts as their header. Usually when it doesn't change from newsletter to newsletter. So jumping into font pairing, it's a huge wide area. There's a bunch of websites you can go to be like best font pairs. We are working on a resource for this because within the beehiiv editor, not all email platforms support all like web fonts. It's actually a relatively small selection of web fonts that are supported across the major email platforms. And so when you do the drop down within the newsletter editor, or sorry, the design lab, you're going to have a relatively limited number of fonts. And that's just because we want your email to look consistent across every inbox. You don't want some users getting an email that looks drastically different than another one. And so we include the fonts that look good across different newsletters. But typically, the way this works is you want to find pairings that complement each other. A lot of times, a serif font, the ones with like the kind of the lines on the end, that's probably making some designers cringe. I don't know how better to describe it, but like Times New Roman is like a serif font. It's got the little base on the bottom. Um, this is, for example, a sans serif font. There is no little, I actually don't have an example. I should have brought an example of serif versus non-serif. But these are all non-serif fonts because there's none of the little flourishes on the sides. Let me see if I have one where it's like a good example of serif font real quick. A lot of sans serif these days. Okay, so this is a serif font. You can see it has those like little flourishes on the bottom and top. And this is a good example where there's a good balance between this serif font and then this sans serif font. Usually, what that strikes is like the serif font typically has this kind of emotion of like more formality, more structure, versus these sans serif fonts tend to be a little bit more playful, a little bit more modern, and so a lot of times you can basically have a nice pairing by selecting, as we see here, that mix of serif and sans serif. Now, you don't have to do it like that, but usually there's ways to kind of create these pairings that the weight and the maybe the boldness of one font is complementary to the lightness and the seriousness of the other font. But just as an example there. Font weights and sizes, this goes into headings. So typically your headings are going to want to be more bold and bigger than your body text. In the design lab, you have H1 through H6. So heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4, heading 5, heading 6. It allows you to create a very clear, logical hierarchy. If you have, your headline and then you have like a subsection, you're going to use H1 and then H2. And then if you have a subsection to that, you might use H3. And as you get deeper into breaking out your content, those headlines are going to usually get maybe smaller, maybe lighter in terms of their weight. Line spacing, this is where content breaks and actual line spacing comes into play. So you have the option in beehiiv to like basically choose your spacing. So like less, which is going to be tighter, more, which is going to spread out the lines between the text. Can help make your content more readable. All of these things play together to create like kind of a visual mood of your newsletter, and so it's worth playing around with. Some you might want it to be a little bit more dense at the perhaps the expense of readability, but it all kind of breaks down. But I encourage you to kind of play around with these different elements. And then again, typography as a design element. There's a lot of newsletters. I know Tyler, our CEO, his headers are designed to kind of look like Windows 95. So they're not typed directly into the editor. He has images because his section headers don't change from edition to edition. He just has these designed headers that are images, but they display the text in a way that is kind of adds to the branding and the overall feel of the Big Desk Energy newsletter. Christina, what are some of your thoughts here? Oh, and you're muted. Tony, can you? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, sorry, I was muting myself because like
Okay.
I think I'm getting echo when when you're talking. So sorry for noises, guys. It was me. I was just thinking like it would be good to bring some examples, visual, like when you can show like this is serif fonts and so on. But
Mm-hmm.
my general advice for serif fonts with those small details, that they are readable and accessible only in larger size. So whenever you're designing your newsletters and you have like heading 3, 4, 5, 6, I would recommend avoiding serif font there and going with simple sans serif typographies that will be definitely accessible and readable. Um, Also, in general, whenever you work with serif fonts, even for your body typography, you need aim for larger typography because serif requires a lighter typography. It's a bit harder to read in digital form. I know we are used to it in books, but it's not the same when you read in digital. So you need to keep in mind accessibility, and the safer choice in majority of cases is sans serif fonts, simple, clean typography. And also, whenever you want to differentiate your headings from your body copy, always just go with bold headings. It's almost never wrong to go with bold headings, making sure they drive all the attention to the heading because that's where you want your user attention. And also, when we speaking about accessibility, a general rule of thumb for body copy is above 16 pixels because it will be accessible for majority of users on the internet, and even with for people with vision problems or any kind of disabilities. So basically 16 pixel as a starting point is your best friend. Anything smaller might be not visible for users already.
This is incredible, and this is one area where, as you can tell, I am not a designer by trade. I've picked up on some of like I've seen a lot of newsletters, so I know it's great. But this is like solid gold because I love how Christina can actually explain like why behind these best practices. So real quick, just leaning in to what she was talking about in terms of some real examples. Um, I had these pulled up a second ago, but we had like in terms of the homepage here, really big serif font, complemented by smaller, sans serif font in terms of readability. When we look at this specific newsletter, I mean, here's a perfect example of using. This is not the typed in text from the editor. These are images that are this is an image that's placed there, so it's like using stylized typography rather than what's directly in the editor. Same thing here. This is a stylized headline. It's the same header for every section every time, so you can really have some fun with it, really make it a little bit more unique. And that's really where you see kind of the up leveling. If we look at over here, at Pixels, again, their kind of header is completely designed using this very unique. I gotta stop clicking. I'm so sorry. Um, Very unique kind of pixelated logo. So it's like it's called Pixels, and they're adding elements of like what the word means into the actual logo, which is a really cool effect here. But again, like this, sans serif, bold, big headlines, followed by the more typical, normal font below. Um, Parallelogram. Let's see if there's anything cool here. Very text heavy on this one, but that's probably what this newsletter is about. We'll get into more imagery with this one, but this one's a really fun one we'll get into in a minute. So we'll just keep on going, and then we'll come back here for more examples as we go. Cool. So moving on from typography to color theory. So we touched on this a little bit in the beginning, but one of the kind of core parts of creating a visual identity is coming up with your brand colors. And so part of this is creating a complementary and cohesive color palette. There's a bunch of tools that we'll reference that we'll drop in the post when we post it. Coolers is a good one. So it's like I think it's COOOLERS. It might be only two O's, but it's a website where you can basically put in a color if you like, the color blue. You can put in whatever shade of blue you like, and it will generate basically a bunch of different options. You can choose complementary. There's a bunch of words that I don't actually know what they mean. Christina probably knows what they mean in terms of design, but I mean, I can show you guys the example right here. We can always go here. Coolers. Okay, so it's only two O's. That makes sense. Coolers. Um, but if we go here, I can put in, I can make it random. I've already been here. So, but if I want to choose, some random color, say like uh, this is the color I really like. I can then uh, basically press the spacebar to either generate random ones or it's been a little while since I've been on the site. There's ways you can choose a color here and then like have it generate the other ones. The other one I'm really familiar with is color.adobe.com. Is it cool? So here we can do again, we can change this, and this is what's going to show the color harmony. So this one's choosing similar colors to the one that we chose, but we can have all of these different options where we can say complementary. So like say this is the color that I'm editing. It's going to give us all of these different colors that are in this case complementary. Um, you know, I don't actually 100% know what all of these kind of the science or like the reasoning behind some of these, like square, compound shades, monochromatic. I think monochromatic's probably just like similar shades of the same color, but really really useful tools for creating cohesive color palettes that are going to generally look really really good together. What you're trying to avoid here, unless it's your brand, is like kind of colors that are clashing that are going to create a experience that is maybe not as good. So within this way, you kind of come up with your cohesive color palette, and then you can use color in a couple different ways. Like we just saw in the Pixels example, they use highlights over the bold headlines to really draw visual attention to those headlines. You can use highlighting within text to obviously highlight specific words or phrases or whatever you want there. You can set colors for your, as we referenced in the beginning, in your links, so that you can kind of train your users that when they see a specific color, it means it's a clickable element. Other places where you can use color in beehiiv specifically, we have our quote block quotes. So if you have like an accent color that's not your main like click this element color, you can use that accent color within content breaks and within block quotes to kind of add that those little splashes. One thing to be not concerned about here, but aware of here, and I'm sure Christina was going to bring this up, is contrast ratios for accessibility. Like this is a huge thing with design of making sure that your colors have enough contrast so that not only are they easy to read for users without any kind of disabilities, but anybody who may have a disability, whether it's color blindness or anything else, can still read and enjoy your newsletter with that contrast in play. And then using those colors in different themes. So again, I'm going to point to Pixels because it's one of the most kind of beautiful, in my opinion, visual newsletters. But they use that purple all over the place. It's like different shades of that purple are kind of all over. Whether it's the treatment they give to the section where they talk about the subject of that newsletter with the neuron, whether it's the logo, the background. You kind of when you hit that site, everything is unified through color in that way. Christina, what are your thoughts here?
Oh, sorry, just wasn't muting myself. My general advice, if you're not sure about colors, less is more. Even a totally black and white newsletter would be a safer option than over designed one. So, whenever you're unsure about colors, go with just default black and white, simple version, and then just choose single accent color you want to add. And this accent color normally could be connected to your links because you want your links to stand out. Because if your buttons and links and everything is just like the same color of your text, they're getting a bit lost. So if you're choosing this accent color for your actions, you need to be consistent about it. So I have, for example, bright blue, and it's my action color. And basically, my links, my CTAs, and everything will be bright blue. And also, my icon can be bright blue just to associate with this more movement of actions around my brand. But basically, if you're unsure, go with just single accent color. It's way, way safer, and make sure you will check the contrast ratio of this color, because there are a lot of online tools. I share just one popular free contrast checker where you can put your background color and your accent color and make sure it's accessible, because if it's not accessible, people most likely will not notice it. So you want to be noticeable, and a single one is better than thousands of them, because it will drive attention where it needs to be driven.
Sick. I had a siren going by. Thank you so much. That was incredible advice. We'll be sure to include that link, and maybe we'll find some more to give you some options when we release the update on the blog. So layout and composition techniques. So this is where we move from kind of more visual to the color and the look and feel to more of the structure and how we're outlining the content to the actual structure to complement your design. So this is an area where I actually have way less experience, and maybe I'll lean on Christina a little bit more with this one. But I know that there's theories around grid systems where you can basically, you have kind of you can imagine like a grid overlay, and you can basically, structure your content, whether it's a picture that you're composing or content to basically make sure that there's proper separation, spacing, that things aren't too close together. There's the rule of thirds in photography and cinematography, where for whatever reason scientifically, like when you have a subject in like one of the thirds, it's like you imagine like two lines and two lines. It's like the thirds is where they're the most striking visually, and your eye is drawn. Second one is kind of thinking about how users are going to actually read through and interact with your newsletter. So there's these different formats where kind of picking up on the psychology of how people will read and scan content. So two of them are F patterns, where you like read across and then you go down and you read across again and you read down and so forth. The other one would be a Z pattern, where you're reading across and then back and down and across. These are can be useful mental models for how you're laying out content that plays on psychology to make it easier for your user to consume the content that you're writing about. Next is white space. This is something that is, when you see that done poorly, it really stands out, but at the same time can be very, very hard to like do really, really well, I find, which is basically, finding enough room for your elements to breathe, whether it's images or text, different sections, um, you know, letting it breathe, having space, having, it doesn't have to be literally white, but like having just blank space that allows your reader to kind of take a break, take a rest, ease that mental load, and reduces like kind of that really strong kind of maybe cluttered feeling of having too much at one time. And then as you're going through your process, like think about how you can create your newsletter using kind of different types of modular design. And so this is, we have some functionality in here where you can make sections and group things into sections. So when you're physically doing the layout and composition, you don't necessarily have to rebuild all of these elements from scratch. So between templates where you can copy an entire template to sections where you can use the copy to clipboard or duplicate sections, there's a lot of ways in which once you kind of have that design and that layout settled, you can design it once and then not necessarily have to do all of the granular, very fine-tuned work to basically replicate that content over and over again. Christina, could you give us a little bit, kind of a more of a deeper dive in some of those first few items as a designer?
Yeah, sure. In general, it may be a bit complex to to explain, and basically, I think you don't need to understand it really deeply to make good decisions about your layout. I would say one of the most important principles is proximity. So elements that are closer to each other, they are getting consumed as a group. So, for example, if your title is next to body copy to a paragraph, people will think, okay, this title is next to this paragraph. So it's one group, a single piece. If you will create too much space between your title and paragraph, people won't connect it together. So they will think it's different elements of design. So proximity is the closer elements are together. That means they are together. So with images, with everything, it's just like creates this single section, for example, if we're thinking about terms of sections. And then as an opposite to proximity is this white space. So when you add this space in between those groups of content, of sections, or whatever grouping you are using, you create a natural break. You don't even need to use breaks. Sometimes you can just like create a natural break using images or like some visual separators that are not part of beehiiv ecosystem, for example, your own PNG images or anything like that. But basically, this space is what creates a feeling, okay, this is an ending chapter. And then basically, I would say there is a hint from beehiiv team on how to use your newsletter. And if you will go to design to newsletter builder designer, basically that's where the hint is. They are suggesting you how to use the titles, how to make sure it all looks good. There is like some separators introduced immediately into your beehiiv newsletter. So basically, whenever you going into builder itself, there is a hint from beehiiv team on how to use it, what is a good layout, and how it will work together. So you can immediately imagine, okay, there is heading one, heading two. It seems like my heading one and heading two are quite the same. So people won't understand if I'm using a larger typography. So probably I should make it bigger. And you see, like there is like a clear space advice from beehiiv team on layout and everything, just already built in into your newsletter from day one. So even if you won't change much, it will be already working. So my general advice here with layout, don't over design. Just follow those simple patterns that are already implemented there. And then when you feel more confident, when you feel more confident about the builder itself, about all the beehiiv features, then you can introduce more and more changes. Start simple, start clean.
Amazing. I think that's worth mentioning two things. So one thing, in the next couple months, as we start to release the brand new web builder, so from our acquisition of TypeDream, we're also redesigning the entire like newsletter designer process, and so that view is going to become much more user friendly. There's definitely some very valid criticism around some of the challenges of having so many different settings. Um, that it is not, as easy as possible. There's definitely ways in which it could be easier, and those are going to be implemented as we release the new website builder. Um, so if you're a little bit intimidated by that, you're not alone. But we are listening, and we are going to be making major updates to that. That has not changed since we practically launched the tool, and now we have a team of multiple designers who are UX designers and graphic designers who are working on making that way more user friendly. So that one's for Daniel in the chat. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that we do our design system a little bit differently. Appreciate you bringing up the design, kind of literally showing the designer, because what our intention with the designer, kind of unlike some other email tools, was to really make it so that when you set this visual design, you're not having to go back and really tweak that design as you're writing. It's like you see how it should basically look, and you set this up once. Maybe you spend a little bit of time really getting it, dialed in, and then when you go to your your editor, and I think most of the folks who have been in here are probably familiar. Once you go in the editor, now you just have this great white space to write. So it's like you're not having to worry about the design. You're not saying, oh, cool, like I just made a headline. How big is that going to be? What should it look like? How should I do that design? So, it's a little bit different than what a lot of other tools do, where you may be writing and designing at the same time. Our goal with our kind of bifurcating those two processes is really to reduce that mental load. So when it's time to write, you can write, and then you can hit preview, you can see it's going to look beautiful right away. You're not having to adjust the padding and the margin and like the sizing of your fonts and the colors of your links and whatnot. As you write, it is meant to be very, very focused. Now, with that said, we do have the tools here. If I write some text, um, you can, if you want, kind of tweak that to make it bigger, smaller. Would recommend doing that very sparingly, because of course if you're doing that all the time, one, your workflow is going to be a little bit disrupted, but it's also kind of become tiring for users to kind of follow, like if you're just using big text and small text and big headers and weird different things. And so these override tools can be very, very helpful to drive impact and to highlight valuable content. But just wanted to kind of double click. It's always I found talking to users, it's can be valuable to double click on why we've made those design choices with the platform. Cool. Moving on, visual content creation and curation. So we talked about this a little bit before with the typography slide, but a lot of folks will opt to create custom illustrations to enhance the brand identity and really add a little bit more connection. So we saw that example with Joy Design Joy. What is it? This one, Joy Hour. Sorry, Laura. Where she's had a lot of fun. This is our graphic designer at Beehiiv. She's had a lot of fun creating these kind of custom illustrations for her headers, which kind of make those sections pop. Other things that other users have done, data visualization. So this is something that's like a little bit different than like kind of you don't think of data and design and art kind of in the same sentence typically, but by visualizing data, you can really get a lot of kind of information across to your users at very, very quickly. Um, Something we see less of, I think, but we're starting to see more of, and certainly within the journalistic space, using stock photos. So whether you got Getty Images, iStock, Adobe Stock, finding those images and editing them. That's one way to kind of create some visual content that's a little bit maybe up leveled a little bit depending on which service you're using. You can use that to kind of enhance your stories, or add a little bit of credibility, add a little bit more professionalism in some ways. And then user generated content. So a lot of times, the writers that we talk to will request either testimonials or sometimes even videos, and we'll either stylize those and drop them in the newsletter, and that can add to the design. In terms of if you have a section where it's like the quote of the week from a user, or you're featuring a Instagram post that somebody wrote. So these are just a couple different ways that you can add additional visual elements to your newsletter. In the name of time, I'm going to kind of move on to the next couple. I think we have two more before we get into the playbooks, and we won't go over the playbooks today, but they'll be take-home things. So this entire conversation would be a little bit remiss if we didn't talk about the web design element. We've kind of referenced a lot of the web sides of things because that's what's really most accessible. A lot of times, obviously with newsletters, people are going to be consuming this content within an email inbox, which with Beehiiv does look more or less very, very similar between the different media. But when you're talking about building your newsletter and you have your web component, a lot of this advice can very much be applied to designing an effective newsletter landing page. And so the example I have prepared for this one is this Smart Nonsense landing page. So this is very much like what their newsletter looks like. It's incredible. They have these custom cartoon animations that are very, very kind of weird, for lack of a better word, but are amazing in all of their newsletters. But they've created this custom landing page that just is very, very engaging. They use kind of this rainbow color palette throughout their newsletter and through the landing page. Custom spacing, so you have this like break between the top where you're focused on getting the subscription, and down below where they have this user generated content, you have a little bit of content around the actual writers themselves, and then some of the examples of some of their posts. So just an example. I don't even know what to make from a lot of these. This may be a little bit of a risky click when I click in these because they can be quite weird. Um, but in this case, they're using custom animations throughout the newsletter. It's a lot of fun. So Yeah, I mean that's one example for landing pages. Uh, Eye-catching thumbnails. So this is really important when you're in your editor. So I think I still have the editor pulled up. We have the ability for you to add a thumbnail. So this is going to be what's shown on social media if somebody shares your post, and it's also going to be what shows up on the website. So in that other example, or any of these ones, actually, if I go back here, you can see this beautiful designed thumbnail. So these are all custom images, but obviously adds to the visual element of like what am I clicking on, adding to that visual identity, and is a great opportunity to be very creative. Um, and then this is one area where we see a lot of people using GIFs in those thumbnails. So it's like if someone's sharing, you hit this page, you can see a little bit of motion that can be really really nice. Not an example there, but other than that, interactive elements. So we saw that on the Smart Nonsense page. As you're scrolling down, you have areas where you can engage with the actual writers. There's just different ways to connect and basically make your site a little bit more engaging through interaction. And then again, designing for social media sharing, that's something that's built directly into beehiiv, but we have the social share elements. When you share, your thumbnail is going to be pulled in, so you can really put the best foot forward when you're sharing across social. Lastly, and this is where I will get some input from Christina, this is a little bit looking towards the future and just some themes that we're seeing in like the modern time, kind of very present. So, you see some newsletters that go for a very minimalist look versus very maximalist. So choosing the one that fits your brand. Micro interactions are very popular. So again, example would be in this smart nonsense page, you have just like these little things you highlight and it turns into a rainbow. It's like a micro interaction that makes it feel a little bit more bespoke. I'm trying to think of another thing. Sometimes you see, yeah, these little, like, you highlight over it and it has a little tiny bit of a movement. Stuff like that just adds a little bit to the feeling of it being kind of very high quality. Increasing in importance dark mode considerations, especially in email. Unfortunately, Google and other platforms don't give us the ability to design for dark mode. They kind of just do their own thing. It's actually one of the most frustrating parts of our job because people will design a newsletter and then somebody opens it in dark mode. We have no control over how that actually is displayed. They don't provide any kind of like design CSS considerations or guidelines on how to actually override or design so that you're the opposite. But for web, there are ways to do this. Typically, there's like you can add a widget that's going to allow users to give a choice between light and dark mode. But that is something that should be considered. Are your users going to be reading this in dark mode? And if they do, what is it going to look like? You're not going to have the same exact design as in light mode, but sometimes you see, when it goes dark, depending on your background or depending on your copy, sometimes it's like becomes dark on dark. And so just understanding what it might look like is something important. And then just staying on top of emerging design trends, we all know kind of the Y2K kind of motif or style. We know it when we see it if we're not designers, but there are these different trends of that are based in time. Points in time. There's things like not MCM in terms of like newsletter design, but there are different trends that emerge that you can emulate if you want to give that certain vibe or feeling. And so staying on top of kind of the cutting edge through reading about design is a good way to incorporate those into your newsletter. Christina, what kind of thoughts do you have around kind of what's emerging, what you're seeing kind of become more popular, maybe from the cutting edge of design that some folks should look out for?
I would say one of the biggest is dark mode considerations because majority of newsletters I've been working with, they have around 80% mobile readers. And when it comes to mobile readers, means after 5, 6 p.m., majority of them are on dark mode. And here we have very little control. So basically, testing it is the best way you can do. It's just like send your test newsletter, switch your mobile phone to dark theme, and make sure you can see your buttons, you can see your links, and you can see your backgrounds. In majority of cases, all the softer pastel colors convert really bad. So whenever you have softer backgrounds or something like that, you can expect it will be like very dark brown or yellow or some weird shades, which is in majority of cases just fine. I would just focus on making sure your titles, CTAs, and links are visible in dark mode, because I've been testing a lot of newsletters and sometimes it's just like it's inaccessible. You can't see.
Mhm.
So basically, people are not having an experience you want them to have when they're reading your newsletter. And when it comes to newsletter design in general, sometimes people forget that newsletter is for reading. It's kind of a blog delivered into a email client, and emails has a lot of restrictions, especially email clients. So over designed newsletters, when they are forwarded, when they are opened by weird new email client, for example, I'm using Superhuman, all my beautiful beehiiv emails look just clean, as simple and the same. So um, is it
It wasn't
depending
always
on,
like
yeah.
that. Our
Yeah,
CEO
I
started
mean,
using Superhuman, and he's like, "None of my Beehive emails look right. What's going on?" And so we designed for Superhuman specifically.
oh yeah, they need some collaboration, but basically, you can't expect to be deliver in the same experience to every single reader. So the safer you play in many cases, the better is for every single reader, unless you have a very specific audience. So, for example, if it's more important for you to be fancy or have animations, or even not worrying about clipping or heavy emails or anything like that, when delivering this design aesthetics is more important for your particular audience, then you can sacrifice a lot of principles. But in general, my advice, especially when you're just starting with Beehive, guys, play safe. Simplicity never kills anyone. And if you want to add some accents, use good visuals. And in current stage of our life and world, we don't even need to be illustrators. Now you can ask ChatGPT to generate you quite well designed images. I mean, overusing it is obviously it's a bit too much. So there are a lot of free stocks as well for photography and everything. Just make sure you're using more visuals that communicate the message you have in your content and kind of like connects both visual consumers and active readers in one single newsletter.
I love that. I want to like frame that quote like simple is better. We see so many people reach out and want to go for the moon from the very beginning, from day one. And it really is true that simple can work really really nicely, and doesn't require that much work to get to. Sorry, I hope someone's banging on a wall or something. I hope nobody can hear that. Sorry if you can. Um, Amazing. So moving along, I have four playbooks that will drop again when we release this deck that you can follow. So first one is creating a style guide. So just a couple of these quick steps to create a very very simple style guide for you to follow. Give yourself some rules and some little bit of a playground to make it easy, kind of reduce that cognitive load when you're going through the designer. A thumbnail design challenge, so creating an engaging thumbnail, putting it out to social media, getting some feedback, and then leveraging that to continue with your as you publish more. A heat mapping task. So this is something that a lot of designers use a lot, either user testing, visual like recordings of users and seeing how they actually interact. And then kind of one of the second best things is actually using heat mapping to understand where users are spending time, with their cursor on the page, or kind of how far down on the page that they're looking. And so this can be really really helpful as you're getting down that format and you're trying to design for engagement. There's a tool, we covered this in one of our last webinars, but it's called Microsoft Clarity. You can put in your Beehive site very, very easily. It's only going to give you the data on the web side of things, but can help give you those signals of like, how far are people reading, how much they're getting out of it. Beehive also does have a click mapping feature, which is our way of getting around some of the limitations that email clients present. But if you have links in your newsletter, we will show you where kind of the most clicks are coming from, and that can kind of be a proxy for how much users are reading. So if you monitor like your button at the bottom of your newsletter, usually only gets 1% of the clicks, and then one day they get 5%. It means that many more people made it to the bottom and they found that more engaging. Um, and then the last one would be steal like an artist. Took this from a book that I read, but choose a well-designed newsletter or website in your industry, and then kind of study what you like about that newsletter, what design elements work well. Something that we did in the past when we were like early at Beehive trying to get clients is like we would find newsletters and we would literally design them in Beehive. We would literally make them identical and like then add any kind of design upgrades in terms of elements or whatnot, and then we would go pitch them to hey, your newsletter's ready to go. You could take this over today on Beehive. You get all these features. It was very, very successful. That is to say that Beehive has a lot of tools. I think there's these days very, 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 very few newsletters that you can't translate one to one from a design into the actual newsletter format. And then lastly, we have our fuck. I'm so sorry. I forgot to update a couple of these slides. I was been super swamped the last couple of days. We've got like a bunch of webinars this week. Um, I will fix this for the when we release this, but so that's not on the screen too much. Before we get to the Q&A, just want to say if this has been useful, just like Christina found us through the Hive community, you know, Hive is an incredible resource for asking questions like this. People will critique your design. You can ask how can you can make things better. We have, I think, 12 or 13 different channels for different things, recommendations, welcomes, cross recommendations, how to feature requests, a whole bunch of stuff, and how to monetize, all of these kinds of things. If this was useful today, the Hive is the place for you. It's a community of 3,000 plus of our active paying Beehive users. And so it's the best place to be if you're really serious about your newsletter and basically getting that feedback loop and joining a community of like-minded people. So I have some questions that the team has prepared. So Tony, I say the team, it's Tony collected this from the Q&A sheet. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to ask the questions and Christina, you can give us our perspective. So uh, let's see. Some of these are more Beehive specific questions that I'll take. But okay, this is a good one. How do you think about the difference between website styling and newsletter styling, and like where do you think kind of the biggest differences, if any, like where should they be similar or different?
Oh, it's a great question. So basically, with website stylings, you have more options. You can go more custom because websites, it's not necessarily about reading a lot of text. There could be just headings and images, and it's enough for you to understand what's going on the website. Versus when you design a newsletter, it's more like thinking about your blog design, and you can notice like majority of blogs look pretty the same. People don't go too creative with them because the main goal of the blog is your content. Your content is king here. So all the visual support, all the colors, all the typography is built on top of your valuable content you are sharing. It's like a supportive language to your main source of inspiration for your readers, and it's your content. So whenever you feel lost or confused, just roll back and feel like, do I deliver high quality good content? Yes. Do I need to over design it? Let's think about it.
That's amazing. I love that. The only thing I would add is that in terms of design, maybe this is not specifically how things would differ between newsletter and website in terms of design, but as you mentioned, like websites do support a lot more in terms of being able to execute JavaScript and CSS. So if you're more of an advanced user, there are different types of like embeds. Like if you have some code from a different tool, there's some things that like a interactive data visualization thing where you could like drag on a chart or something like that. There's different tools that will work on the web that don't render within the email client because email doesn't support JavaScript. And so if you have a tool or there's a something some part of your stack that you can embed, that can certainly be additive to the web experience and would not be something that you can put in an email. And that's not a Beehive limitation. That's almost always, or literally always, a email limitation of the media. Christina, the rest are kind of more Beehive specific questions, and so I'm going to take those. But before I get to those, we had some people asking how they can reach out to you and work with you. I know you dropped a couple links, but if you want to drop your link in the chat, but also for the recording, we can maybe say it out loud as well.
Oh, you can just find all the information details at my website, christy.digital. My Beehive blog or newsletter is also there available at blog.christy.digital. But basically, I wanted to also remind you about one more thing that a lot of people forget when it comes to newsletter. Your reader's experience, it starts before Beehive. It starts when someone recommends your newsletter, when you post it on LinkedIn, Instagram, social media channels. That's where the experience starts. So when they land on your landing page, or when they discover your post and so on, you need to keep in mind where from they're coming. So if they're coming from social media or Instagram, most likely they will be mobile users signing, even if your newsletter more desktop friendly, they will be mobile users and so on. So basically always start one step behind when you're designing your newsletter, thinking where from people are coming, what I communicate to them outside of beehiiv platform, and if it aligns with what's happening here. Because if you have different messages, different visual language, and different brand, people won't sign up. They won't subscribe because they will not understand that it's the same promise, the same brand, and the same newsletter.
Amazing. I love that, and that's a great way to close. With the last couple minutes, if people have to drop, then totally fine to do that. I have a couple questions that were asked around beehiiv specific things, and so we'll cover those really quickly. But obviously, we said this was going to be for an hour, and we're a little bit over. Um, but one would be just kind of across going through things very specific. So somebody runs multiple publications on the same account, and they're asking about how to use the same media assets across other publications. Right now, the way that we structure publications is that they're totally separate. The similarity or the kind of the connection is that you can jump from one to the other, but there's no connection between them. And so, unfortunately, at the time being, you'd have to upload them in both places. The only other solution would be if you were to grab the link, if you like have a post that's published, you can right click and it'll say like copy link address, which is actually the link to the image, and I believe you can potentially drop that in, but it's probably a lot more work than just uploading the image again. We do have updates coming, no timeline on this, but we do have updates coming to kind of manager accounts, so like a workspace wide shared assets. So if you are managing multiple newsletters, there's going to be a way to be able to see like a shared dashboard of like all of your content and all of your performance. That's probably coming in 2025, but I don't have a timeline on that. We have another user asking about A/B testing, design, and copy. So right now, again, this is another thing that we are hoping to add in 2025 as well, is the ability to A/B test either content or elements of content within a newsletter. That's something that there's been desire for, and so again, no timeline in that, but that is something that we do expect to add. Right now, the way we recommend people doing it, the way that people do it successfully, is if you have a newsletter that you're publishing week after week, you can basically have a newsletter that you may change it for 1 week or you may change it for a week or two, and you can see and monitor how people react to that. A lot of times, people will also add something like a poll or a almost like a satisfaction survey if you do make a change, to be like, hey, I changed this up. What are your thoughts, better or worse? And that's a way for you to get that feedback a little bit more explicitly than just monitoring things like open rate and engagement rate. Um, Third question: when are templates coming, and what does TypeDream integration look like? TypeDream integration is coming early in 2025, like very early January, February time. Um, Templates, I believe, are going to be launched with that, and so the way that we're doing templates will be a little bit different than currently. Right now, templates mean it's just the format. When you copy a template, it's just the copy itself. What we're building in the early stages of right now are actually full functional like design plus content templates. So if you wanted to share something, it's like, hey, this is like Morning Brew's design and like these are their content sections, you'd have that all in one place. You're going to be much more full functional. And then in terms of what the TypeDream integration looks like, if you look at a site like Webflow or Framer, how you can build with those, it's going to be very, we're going to be competing directly with them in terms of full functionality of being able to control every element of your front-end newsletter design. If you take a look at TypeDream, we're not just like adding an integration where it's like, oh, your beehiiv account now like plugs into TypeDream. We're like the TypeDream team literally is rebuilding TypeDream within beehiiv with all the learnings they learned from building TypeDream, all of the things that they wish they had done differently, all the things that we wish we had done differently, the learnings that we found. all being combined into what is looking like one of the best web design developer tools on the market. Um, and does beehiiv support CSS and media queries? We automatically do the styling around media queries for different devices, so your designs are automatically mobile responsive. I believe that's what is meant here by media queries. And then within your design lab, there's settings where you can actually customize the CSS of the newsletter itself. So I'll share my screen for one other second to show it. It's a little bit hidden. I believe we still offer it. And this will be the last question. So go over here, quick. So if I go, I think it's under the heading settings. So if I go to email header, custom CSS, yeah, we still have it right here. So if there's anything that's like custom that you want to implement, you can do it here. So this will plug and modify existing content. So this will be like H1s and body text and whatnot. And then can extend if you are somebody who has HTML skills. Anything that's like an HTML snippet that's in the newsletter would be able to be accessible to this, like would be affected by this custom CSS. And so that's where we see a lot of people who are more power users or design experts or developers working. You can combine HTML snippets where you can insert custom HTML, either that in isolation, or you can do that plus some custom CSS to really fine tune what you're doing with the visual of the newsletter. With that, that brings us to the questions that I have here. Thank you all so much for sticking around. We looks like we didn't really even lose that many people after the top of the hour. So I really appreciate you spending the extra 6 minutes with all of us here. I want to give a big shout out to our man behind the scenes, Tony, our producer. He's done a great job curating those questions and basically answering folks. He's been, me in the chat, and it hasn't been me responding. It's been Tony, so he's great. And huge thank you to Christina. This has been one of the best virtual events I think we've done so far. So much value, so useful for so many people, and is only going to be seen by hundreds and thousands of more people as they find the recording in the future. And I'm going to thank you on behalf of them. And I'm sure you'll get a bunch of people reaching out to you. But thank you so much for taking your time today. Really appreciate you joining us. And
It
with
was
that,
pleasure, guys. It was
absolutely.
pleasure. Thank you for having me.
With that said, we also appreciate all of you, the 37 of you who are still here, and all the other ones who've already left, of course. But to you out there who's watching this recording, to you guys who are out there watching the live stream right now, we couldn't do it without you. You're the reason why all of this makes sense to do. You're the reason why we do this. And just have so much appreciation for our community. Thank you so much. If you're not on beehiiv, you can find us at www.beehiiv.com. You can sign up for a free trial. If you're already a beehiiv user, thank you so much for your trust and your time. And we look forward to serving you. Have a great day, everyone. Cool. All right, we're no